So we are speaking with attorney Faya Toure, who is involved very much in the leadership capacity, planning the Jubilee, the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday, that fateful day in Selma, Alabama, 50 years ago, which became a seminal event, a turning point, so to speak, in the civil rights struggle back in the day. Now, Faya, this was 50 years ago, which means that 2 generations have passed. There are 2 generations of our people, our younger folk, who have no memory.
None.
And very little knowledge.
That's right.
Of what happened on that fateful day. Can you take us back to the events of that day before we begin to speak about the...
I'm glad you
the plans for the Jubilee.
Acknowledge that so many 2 generations are without knowledge, at least 1 generation is complete without knowledge. And that's why there's such a little appreciation for the right to vote. But it was really, we would have to go back to the 30s in Selma. There was a couple that came to Selma by the name of Samuel and Amelia Boynton. They just graduated from Tuskegee. And Mr. Boynton was a registered voter back then. Totally committed to doing 2 things, black land ownership and black voting rights. And they married and began that journey using their positions as extension agents to go into rural areas to encourage people off of the plantations and sharecroppers and to own their own land and to register to vote. In 1963, Mr. Boynton died after being attacked in his business by a white businessman who was jealous of the fact that these people were independent and self-sufficient, because by this time they'd started their own insurance company. His death triggered the first mass meeting in Selma in '63 at the Tabernacle Church. Selma was known as one of the meanest places. There were no church bombings there because they had already instilled such fear in black people that there was no need for the Klan to be as violent there as in other places. But for the first time, black people came forward and came to the memorial service, even though Reverend Anderson, the pastor of the church, was told by his congregation, don't allow that to happen here. He said, oh, it will happen. But that was really the beginning of the modern voting rights movement. People like Bernard Lafayette came to Selma and others to really prepare the way with the Boyntons and a man unknown in history by the name of C.J. Adams. By this time, C.J. Adams is dead. But to make this long story short, it was during this period of time that SCLC sent people like James Orange into the Black Belt. James Orange was in Marion, Alabama, leading marches against segregation when he was arrested. That night in February 1965, the plan was to kill him, to remove him from the jail and to lynch him. Albert Turner and others found out about the plan and had a night march. At this, just to protect his life, at this night march, Jimmy Lee Jackson was killed. And the death of Jimmy Lee Jackson just incurred outrage. And people said, well, look, I think it was James Belver said, let's take his body and lay it at the foot of George Wallace, because this was an act of terrorism. Yes. What was going on in the South was they talk about ISIS, but these were the ISIS of the South. Exactly. You're talking about a history of terror where black men were not only beheaded, but burnt alive, lynched, and castrated. This is the South that no one wants to talk about. And it worked. The terror froze the courage of the people. It was so intimidating that very few people would stand up, even ministers. But the death of Jimmy Lee Jackson, I guess it was a matter of time, and because it triggered this undeniable spirit and determination to end voter suppression and voter violations. So 600 people showed up in Selma on March the 7th. Brown Chapel Church determined to march from Selma to Montgomery. They said, well, we'll not take his body, but we'll take his spirit. Well, after they crossed the bridge, people said it started on the bridge, but they had crossed the bridge, about 600 people, and George Wallace, of course, sent his posse and then deputized Jim Clark, these terrorists. I would call them for what they are. They were terrorists. They were American citizens, but they were terrorists. And they were determined to stop this march by any means necessary. And of course, the beatings and the cruelty was captured on national TV. Right. Because on that same day on TV, guess what? the trials of some of the Nazis and their atrocities was being aired. When people saw what happened in Nazi Germany, they said, "Oh my God, look what's happening in Selma." So people began to come to Selma by the thousands. Dr. King was not at the first march, but he came to the second march. It was turned around Tuesday because they turned back. But the third march, they marched all the way from Selma to Montgomery. By the time they arrived,
What's the distance in terms of miles?
50 miles.
50 miles.
And of course, when they reached St. Jude, scores of people like Sammy Davis Jr., Harry Belafonte, all these people came. Joan Baez,